the discovery didn't announce itself with thunder or prophecy. It arrived the way the Vatican's most dangerous truths often do, slipping in through a harmless detail no one was meant to linger on. That morning was the color of ash. The kind of dull, soft light that makes marble look less like stone and more like something fossilized, bone-polished by centuries of hands and hymns. Pope Leo XIV rose before the bells, finished his prayers, and studied the day laid out for him. It was strangely empty. A few private matters. A brief blessing. Then hours of open space, silence where there should have been motion. And yet the Vatican, even when quiet, never truly rests. Somewhere a seal would be pressed into wax. Somewhere a corridor would swallow footsteps. Somewhere a door would close with the careful discretion of habit. The city-state breathes in whispers. Leo didn't go looking for spectacle. He went looking for an answer to a question that had started bothering him in the simplest way possible. For weeks, an archivist had been sorting late 19th century materials, lists, ledgers, inventories that most eyes skimmed without catching. Leo had asked to see them, not because a pope should, but because he had learned what institutions learn early: the most protected thing is rarely the most holy. It is often simply the most feared. One entry had refused to let go of him. A single line. A single restriction. And a note in the margin that felt less like policy and more like a hand pressed over someone's mouth. Vault of the keys. Not to be consulted. Entry forbidden since the pontificate of Leo XIII. It wasn't the name that tightened his attention. It was the word forbidden, clean, blunt, final. A word that didn't explain itself. A word that assumed obedience. By mid-morning, Leo walked into the apostolic library with only 3 others, Father Esteban Gallo, the archivist who had found the line, and 2 Swiss guards whose presence was less ceremony than gravity. The air inside was cool and still, as if the building preferred not to exhale. Dust drifted lazily through pale shafts of light, turning every step into something visible. Gallo bowed too quickly, the movement betraying nerves he was trying to hide. He led the Pope along narrow corridors lined with cabinets stamped in brass and age, through a section that felt less like a library and more like the underside of a great machine. "Your Holiness," he said softly, as though the shelves might repeat him. "It isn't on modern maps. The records say it was sealed during repairs, almost a century ago. No one wrote down why." Leo listened without hurrying him. Then, with the calm of a man who had spent his life around locked doors, he gave a small, almost gentle smile. "Then we'll stop pretending we don't know where it is." The passage ended at a fresco, a familiar scene, rendered with familiar reverence, St. Peter receiving the keys. The paint was immaculate in that way holy art often is, as if beauty itself were meant to discourage suspicion. But Gallo didn't look at the saints. He looked at the wall. He brushed away dust near the edge and tapped the plaster in careful increments. Once. Twice. Again. The sound changed, subtly, unmistakably, into a hollow answer. The guards exchanged a glance, then stepped forward. With deliberate pressure, they pried, and the fresco, impossibly, shifted. The panel yielded like something that had been waiting for permission, revealing a narrow iron door behind it, dark with age, untouched by any modern hand. There was no handle. Only a rusted keyhole, and above it, words carved into the stone as if the wall itself had been sworn to remember. Not all keys are given to all men. Leo stared at the inscription longer than anyone expected. Then he lifted his hand and traced the Latin with one finger, not reading it so much as feeling the warning beneath it, an old caution pressed into the architecture like a pulse. And in that small, quiet contact, skin against stone, something in the day seemed to shift. Because the morning Pope Leo XIV entered the vault began without ceremony, and the Vatican, above him, continued moving as if nothing at all was about to change. Quick moment, subscribe now. It helps the channel grow and guarantees you never miss the next release. Leo withdrew his hand from the inscription, and for a moment, no one spoke. The two Swiss guards stood like statues flanking an altar, their discipline masking the fact that neither of them had expected the wall to move. Father Esteban Gallo kept his gaze fixed on the keyhole, as if looking directly at it might invite the door to open on its own. The Pope, however, simply breathed. He had been seated on the chair of Peter for less than a year, long enough to learn how easily the Vatican could turn motion into camouflage. How 1,000 rituals could make a single deviation disappear. How silence, when distributed properly, could look like peace. His schedule had thinned without explanation. He hadn't ordered it. No one would admit to ordering it. But there it was, an open stretch of hours that felt less like an accident than a corridor cleared in advance. Leo reached into the pocket of his cassock and drew out a small ring of keys. Not ceremonial keys. Not the gilded symbols that appeared in portraits. These were plain, practical, and worn, carried by a man who had spent his life walking through places where doors mattered. Gallo swallowed. Your Holiness, I should inform the Secretary of State. Leo's eyes remained on the keyhole. And what would he do with the information? Gallo hesitated, too long. Leo's faint smile returned, not unkind. We are here. That is enough. He selected a key that looked almost too ordinary to belong to anything hidden behind frescoes. The metal was dull, the teeth asymmetrical. For a breath, he held it poised, as if listening for an answer from the stone itself. Then he inserted it. The lock accepted it with an ease that felt wrong. Not stiff with neglect. Not resistant with age. It turned as if it had been oiled that morning. As if the door had been waiting, not sealed. A soft click echoed into the corridor. The sound was small, yet it seemed to travel farther than it should have, slipping into the library's endless aisles like a whispered confession. One of the guards reached forward, instinctive. Leo lifted his hand, not a command, just a gentle refusal. I will, he said. He pressed, and the iron door opened. Behind it, a narrow stairwell descended into darkness so complete it looked like solid matter. The first step was damp. The air that rose from below was cold and metallic, carrying a scent of oil and iron and something older, like paper that had been kept too long in a sealed chest. A lamp flickered to life on the wall, as if triggered by their presence. Then another. Each one shivered as it caught, throwing unsteady light down the spiral. Gallo's voice lowered again. There's power down there. Leo glanced at the wiring, thin, purposeful, running along the stone in a way that didn't match anything modern. No conduit. No visible source. Just current feeding light into a place that officially did not exist. Someone wanted it seen, Leo murmured. Not visited. The guards moved first, stepping carefully, their boots making muted sounds on worn stone. Leo followed, his hand resting lightly on the rail. The staircase spiraled down in tight turns, the walls drawing closer with every step, as if the earth itself were narrowing its throat. Above them, the Vatican remained intact, marble halls, incense, schedules, diplomacy. Down here, those things felt like distant inventions. After several rotations, the air changed again. It thickened. Not with humidity, but with something like held breath. The lamps grew more erratic, their flicker no longer a mechanical fault but a rhythm, hesitation, pulse, hesitation. At the bottom, the stairwell opened into a chamber. It was not large, but it was engineered with a kind of deliberate severity, bare stone walls, a floor polished smooth by time, and in the center, dominating everything, a massive black vault. Its metal surface seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Engraved into the door were papal insignia, and around them 7 symbols arranged with unsettling symmetry. A crown. A chalice. A sword. A cross. A dove. A book. An eye. Gallo stared as if he'd stumbled into a myth that had grown teeth. I've never seen this. That is the point, Leo said. He approached. The vault did not look like a container. It looked like a decision. Something designed to separate the world into before and after. There was no keypad, no modern lock. Only the 7 symbols, each set into a circular mechanism with faint grooves that suggested movement. Leo raised his hand, then paused, not from fear, but from a kind of reverence that wasn't wholly so much as cautious. Institutions remember, he thought. They remember their victories, and they remember their shame. But above all, they remember what they buried. He placed his palm on the cold metal. The vault responded. A low sound rolled through the chamber, too deep to be called a click. The symbols began to shift, one by one, aligning as if following an instruction no one had spoken aloud. The mechanism did not resist. It did not challenge him. It recognized him. The guard stiffened. One step back, hand brushing the hilt of his ceremonial sword out of habit, not usefulness. Gallo made a sign of the cross without realizing he'd done it. Leo kept his hand steady. When the final symbol settled into place, the vault seemed to exhale. Air rushed out, not violently, but with the soft force of a sealed century being undone. It carried the sharpness of metal and wax, and something almost mineral, like stone that had been warmed by hidden light. The door eased open. Inside, resting on a shelf lined with faded crimson cloth, were 2 objects placed with almost ritual care. The first was a book bound in scarlet leather, thick and heavy, its cover sealed with a dark wax stamp that bore the impression of crossed keys. The second was a bronze scroll, rolled tight, etched in archaic Latin that looked older than the ink of the inventory that had named this place. Leo's gaze locked on the book. Not because it was beautiful, but because it felt, impossibly, alive. As if it held something that did not want to remain contained. He lifted it with both hands. The leather was cool, the wax unbroken. And on the cover, pressed in faint lettering that caught the lamp's tremble, was a title that stopped his breath in his chest. The Writing of Peter. For a long moment, the chamber was silent except for the lamp's uncertain flicker and the distant, almost imperceptible hum of power feeding the impossible. Leo did not open the book. He didn't need to. Some things announce themselves without being read. Some things carry their warning on their surface, the way a storm carries its pressure before the first drop falls. "This isn't a relic," he said quietly. Gallo looked up at him, his face pale in the shifting light. "What is it, then?" Leo held the book closer, as if feeling the weight of centuries through the binding. "A message," he said. Then, after a beat, softer, more to himself than to anyone else. "Or an alarm." And as the words left his mouth, somewhere inside the vault's dark interior, something moved, a subtle rotation of metal, a second mechanism engaging without any hand guiding it. A hidden lock turned. A hidden lock turned. It wasn't loud. It didn't clang or grind the way old metal should. It was a precise sound, almost courteous, like a latch being undone in a room where someone had been waiting with their hand already on the bolt. Father Esteban Gallo stiffened. One of the Swiss guards leaned forward, eyes narrowing, as if the vault's interior might suddenly reach out and take something from them. Pope Leo XIV did not move at first. He stood with the scarlet book balanced in his hands, the wax seal still intact, the title still staring back at him with the blunt calm of an accusation. The second mechanism clicked again. This time the sound came from behind the vault's open door, deeper within the darkness. A panel, perfectly flush with the stone wall, shifted a fraction of an inch. A line appeared where there had been none. A seam, thin as a blade. Gallo's voice came out dry. "That wasn't there." "No," Leo said softly. "It wasn't meant to be." He set the bronze scroll down first, carefully, as though even touching it had weight. Then he held the book closer and studied the wax. The seal bore the crossed keys, familiar, sacred, official. But there was something else in its impression, faint and warped by time, a mark like a door half closed. He broke it. The snap of wax was small, yet the chamber seemed to hear it. The lamps shuddered. The hum in the wires deepened by a degree, like a throat clearing before speech. Leo opened the scarlet cover. Inside, the writing was not ornate. No gold leaf. No embellishment. The Latin was spare, almost severe, ink that had been laid down by someone who wanted the words to outlive their comfort. He read in silence at first. His face remained still, but something in his eyes tightened, as if the text were not telling him a story but locating him, pinning him to a place in time. Gallo watched his lips move soundlessly. The guards watched the doorway. Leo turned the first page. Then the next. The writing of Peter spoke not of triumph, but of measurement. It spoke of faith being weighed in ledgers, of devotion counted in systems, of truth passing through hands that called themselves guardians until the truth emerged filtered, thinned, obedient. It described a church that mistook order for holiness and silence for peace. And beneath it all, threaded through the lines like a hidden current, was a phrase that returned again and again. Porta silentia. The gate of silence. Leo's breathing slowed. He felt, with a clarity that was not intellectual but physical, the way the words aligned with the world above them. The paperwork. The councils. The careful language. The decisions made behind doors, wrapped in sanctity, justified by fear. A passage caught his attention, short, brutal in its simplicity. The gate will open when the shepherd is chosen not by spirit, but by dread. Leo held the page steady. The ink trembled slightly in the flicker of the lamps. For a moment he could not tell if the tremor belonged to the air or to the stone beneath his feet. "This is about now," he said. Gallo blinked. "Your Holiness." Leo looked up, and the chamber's weak light made shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there minutes before. "It isn't warning someone in the past. It's warning someone in the present." The hidden seam behind the vault widened with a slow inevitability, like a wound deciding to open. One of the guards spoke for the first time, his voice a careful effort at steadiness. "Holy Father, perhaps we should return. Inform the proper offices." Leo closed the book, not as an ending, but as a decision. "If we inform them," he said, "we will spend the rest of the day being told why we should not be here." Gallo's hands hovered uselessly at his sides. "But this place, this shouldn't be responding." Leo stepped toward the seam. The stone panel shifted as he approached, sliding aside without complaint. Beyond it was not another storage chamber, not another shelf of documents. It was a corridor. Narrow. Unmapped. Cut into the earth with an intention that felt personal. The air that poured from it was colder than the stairwell above. It smelled less of oil and iron now, more of mineral damp and something sharp, like ozone after lightning. The lamps along the wall flickered, then steadied, as if relieved to have someone watching again. Leo lifted the scarlet book. The corridor was too tight for four. The guards knew it before they spoke, their shoulders would scrape stone. Their presence would turn the passage into a procession. Leo glanced back at them. "Stay here," he said. The taller guard hesitated. "Your Holiness." "This is not a place for authority to arrive in armor," Leo replied, not unkindly. "If it's waiting for anything, it is not waiting for force." Gallo stepped forward immediately, his fear overridden by something like duty. "I should come with you." Leo studied him for a beat. In Gallo's eyes he saw not ambition, not curiosity, but the trembling loyalty of someone who had spent his life respecting sealed doors and now found himself standing beside the one man who could open them. "You've done enough," Leo said. "If I don't return, you will need to remember exactly where this is." Gallo swallowed hard. "Your Holiness." Leo did not give him comfort. Comfort would have been a lie. He turned and entered the corridor alone. The stone narrowed around him. The sound of the vault chamber faded behind him until even the lamp's hum seemed distant. His footsteps became the only rhythm, soft, controlled, as if he did not want to wake whatever slept beneath the Vatican. The passage ended at another door. It was smaller than the iron vault, older than the stone around it, and it did not look locked in any normal sense. There was no keyhole, no handle, no seam a blade could find. It was simply a slab of dark stone set into the corridor, smooth as water that had never learned to ripple. Yet as Leo approached, he felt pressure in his ears, like altitude. A silence that wasn't absence of sound, but presence of something. He lifted the scarlet book toward the stone. The moment the cover came within a hand's breadth, the slab vibrated. Not the violent shake of an earthquake. A finer motion, like a tuning fork struck gently in a room full of glass. The vibration passed through Leo's fingers into his wrists, up his arms, and settled in his chest. The stone recognized him. A line of pale light appeared across its surface, thin at first, then brightening into a seam. The door did not swing. It parted, as if opening were its natural state and it had merely been holding its breath. Beyond lay a chamber. Circular. Wider than the corridor suggested. Its walls curved away into shadow, and the air inside was unnaturally still, not stagnant but held, as though the room had been sealed by intention rather than mortar. At the center stood a marble tablet split by a glowing seam. The light was wrong. It did not cast shadows the way light should. It seemed to exist without a source, not illuminating the chamber so much as declaring itself within it. Leo stepped over the threshold. The silence pressed harder, not painful but absolute, as if the chamber did not allow lies to survive inside it. And then he saw it. An imprint in the stone floor near the tablet, kneeling, human in shape, yet not made by flesh. It was as though someone had prayed so long, so fiercely, that the earth had decided to remember the posture. The edges of the imprint were smooth, softened by time, but the outline remained unmistakable. Prayer preserved in matter. Leo's throat tightened. His first instinct was not fear, but reverence, a strange humility before something older than doctrine. He glanced back at the corridor. The doorway behind him was still open, still breathing pale light into the passage. He could leave. He could return to the marble halls above and seal this place again under 1,000 layers of administrative language. He could pretend that forbidden meant not his responsibility. Instead, Pope Leo XIV took one slow step toward the marble tablet split by light, toward the seam that seemed to divide the world into speech and silence. And the chamber answered him by growing brighter. The light intensified without flaring. It did not blind him. It clarified him. Leo felt it in the way cold water feels when it closes over the head, total, encompassing, undeniable. The seam in the marble tablet widened by a hair. The kneeling imprint seemed to deepen, as if the stone itself were inhaling. He set the scarlet book on the edge of the tablet. The moment leather touched marble, the room changed. The silence became heavier, as if a great door had closed somewhere far above. The air vibrated with a pressure that was not sound. Leo's skin prickled. His heartbeat slowed into a strange calm, like an animal going still before a storm because it knows running won't help. He looked once more at the imprint. Then he stepped into it. His knees met the stone exactly where the worn outline guided him, and the fit was so precise it was terrifying, like sitting into a chair shaped specifically for the body. Leo bowed his head. He did not speak aloud. There was no need. The chamber felt like a place where speech was a lesser language. The light filled the room completely. And then Pope Leo XIV vanished. Not with violence. Not with a flash. Not even suddenly. One breath he was there, kneeling, hands resting lightly on the stone, the scarlet book beside him like a seal. The next breath, the kneeling space was empty. The imprint remained. The light remained. But the man was gone, as if the chamber had simply accepted him. Above, the Vatican continued in its practiced rhythm for several minutes. Bells rang. A door closed. A messenger crossed a corridor carrying papers that would become decisions. Then the first interruption reached the wrong ears. A Swiss guard, pale under his helmet, emerged from the Apostolic Library and requested immediate audience with the Secretary of State. Within moments, the request became a chain of whispers traveling faster than any official announcement could. The Pope had gone into a sealed vault. The Pope had not returned. Locks were ordered shut. Corridors were quietly cleared. Certain doors that rarely closed were closed. Certain phones that rarely rang began to ring in rooms where windows never opened. When Father Esteban Gallo was brought before a small gathering of senior officials, he tried to explain what he had seen, but he realized quickly that the Vatican had two kinds of listening. One kind listened for truth. The other listened for control. "Your Holiness went alone," a cardinal demanded, his voice tight with something that wanted to be called concern. "I begged to follow," Gallo said, and hated how weak it sounded. "He told me to remember the way." Another voice, lower, sharper, cut through. "Remembering is not enough. That place should never have been disturbed." Gallo looked up and saw Cardinal Severi. Severi was not the oldest in the room, but he carried the weight of someone who had spent decades protecting the Church from embarrassment, scandal, and anything he could not classify. His fear came dressed as responsibility, and it was convincing because it had practice. "We cannot allow rumors," Severi said. "Not now. Not with the world watching everything we do. Cut the power to the lower archives. Seal the library wing. No one enters without my authorization." But Gallo began. Severi's gaze pinned him. "The Holy Father's safety is now a matter of containment." Containment. As if the Pope were a spill. Arguments rose and fell. Some wanted to call for help, to expand the circle, to flood the Vatican with the kind of attention that would force answers. Others wanted silence, the old method, the instinct to bury what couldn't be explained until time made it boring. Severi won. He always did, in rooms like this. Within the hour, the power line feeding the lower chambers went dead. The lamps beneath the Vatican flickered once, then went dark. Iron doors were sealed. A guard detail doubled. Keys changed hands. Yet beneath the locked architecture, the stone did not feel sealed. It felt awake. Cardinal Severi took 2 Swiss guards and ordered Father Gallo to lead them back to the fresco. Gallo protested, quietly, desperately, that the place had responded to the Pope, that it had opened as if recognizing him. Severi's reply was cold. "Then we will close it as if it never recognized anyone." The fresco panel was already slightly displaced from earlier, the dust disturbed, the wall secret now a wound you could not pretend was skin. Severi stared at the iron door and the carved warning above it. "Not all keys are given to all men." For a moment, something like hesitation passed over his face. Then he hardened into his role. "We were given stewardship," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "And stewardship means preventing catastrophe." Gallo watched him unlock the door with hands that did not tremble. They descended. Without power, the stairwell was worse. The darkness pressed in, thick and intimate. Flashlights carved thin tunnels through the air. The smell of oil and iron seemed sharper, angrier, as if the underground disliked being approached without its own light. At the bottom, the chamber with the black vault waited like a heart that had stopped beating. Severy stepped forward. "Open it." Gallo's throat constricted. It responded to him, "Eminence." "I don't know if—" "Open it," Severy repeated. They approached the vault. The 7 symbols were barely visible in the flashlight beams. Severy lifted a gloved hand and placed it on the cold metal. Nothing happened. His jaw tightened. He pressed harder, as if force might imitate authority. Still nothing. Then, without warning, the symbols shifted on their own. A low sound rolled through the chamber, deep enough to be felt in the teeth. The vault exhaled air that tasted like metal and centuries. The hidden seam in the wall widened again, even though no one had touched it. Gallo felt dread sweep through him, not because the door opened, but because it opened without permission. Severy's eyes gleamed. "There," he said. "You see? Mechanism. Not miracle." He stepped into the corridor beyond. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air changed. Even the guards seemed to sense it, their shoulders stiffened, their breathing audible in the narrow passage. They reached the smooth stone door. It did not part for Severy. He stood before it and waited, as if waiting could become an act of command. He raised his hand and struck the stone once with the side of his fist. The impact sounded wrong, dull, absorbed. "Open," Severy said, voice tight. The stone did not respond. Then the guards' flashlights flickered. Gallo's skin crawled. The corridor seemed to narrow. The silence thickened. And somewhere beyond the sealed slab, a pale line of light appeared, thin, patient, as if something on the other side had opened an eye. Severy turned slightly, triumphant. "You see? It yields." But it wasn't yielding to him. The seam brightened, and the stone door parted, not fully, not like an invitation. More like a mouth opening just enough to swallow. A pressure wave rolled outward. The guard staggered. Gallo's knees almost buckled. Severy stepped forward, compelled by his own certainty. He disappeared into the light. Not pulled. Not dragged. Simply taken, as if the chamber beyond had recognized the shape of fear and decided it belonged inside. The stone door closed again. The corridor became ordinary darkness. And Cardinal Severy never returned. By the time dawn reached St. Peter's Basilica, the Vatican was locked into a silence so tense it felt like prayer forced through clenched teeth. No announcement was made. None could be. Words had become dangerous. They might turn into rumors the moment they left her mouth. Swiss guards maintained positions that made no sense to anyone outside the circle. Priests moved through corridors avoiding eye contact. A small emergency council convened and dissolved and convened again, every debate circling the same invisible center. If the Pope is gone, what do we do with the Church? If the Church is shaken, what do we do with the world? Just before first light, a young cleric on duty in the basilica reported something impossible. Someone was praying. Not in a side chapel. Not in a private corner. At the heart of the basilica, near the altar, where stone holes sound like water holds moonlight, there was a figure kneeling alone. When the guards approached, they slowed without meaning to. The air around the figure felt dense, charged. The marble beneath their boots seemed to hum faintly, as if the building itself had become a single instrument waiting to be played. It was Pope Leo XIV. Alive. Whole. Uninjured. But not unchanged. His posture was steady, perfectly aligned, like someone who had been placed rather than arrived. His hands were folded, and his lips moved in prayer with a calm that looked too complete to be relief. A guard whispered, "Holy Father." Leo did not look up immediately. He finished a phrase, and when he spoke again, the sound did something no human voice should do. It came twice. One voice was Leo's, gentle, familiar, breath-warmed. The other was older. Deeper. Not loud, but absolute, as if it belonged to the stone itself. The two voices moved in perfect synchronization, led so precisely it felt like listening to a single note played by two instruments tuned to the same truth. Those who heard it felt their stomachs tighten. Not with fear alone, but with recognition, an instinctive sense that something foundational had shifted. The basilica's marble floor vibrated faintly, not enough to shake dust loose, but enough to be felt through souls and bones. Gallo, who had been dragged there half-dressed and shaking, stepped forward until he could see Leo's face in the growing light. Leo opened his eyes. And in them was a calm that did not belong to a man who had vanished into a chamber no map admitted existed. "Father Gallo," he said, twice, once in his voice, once in the older one. Gallo's throat tightened. "Your Holiness, where did you go?" Leo's gaze lifted slowly toward the vaulted ceiling, toward saints painted in triumph, toward gold and marble that had always implied stability. "The gate of silence," he said, and the words carried weight as if spoken by two histories at once. Then he looked back down, and the hum beneath the basilica deepened, soft, steady, awake. "I went where the Church has been waiting," Leo said. And when he continued praying, he was no longer praying alone. The basilica held its breath. It was not a poetic thought, not a metaphor offered for comfort. It was something the guards felt in their throats, something the priests noticed in the way sound refused to carry the way it should. Even the candles seemed to burn with a steadier, more attentive flame, as if the air had become deliberate. Pope Leo XIV remained kneeling, hands folded, his head slightly bowed. The two voices continued in perfect alignment, his own and the older one beneath it. Not competing. Not echoing. Speaking as one. Father Esteban Gallo stood several paces behind him with a cluster of clergy and guards, unsure whether stepping closer would be reverent or dangerous. His mind kept returning to Cardinal Severi, gone, swallowed by a door that did not behave like stone. He wanted to ask about him. He wanted to ask 100 questions that would make the world feel normal again. Leo finished the prayer and let the silence settle. When he rose, it was unhurried. Not careful, not weary. Simply complete. His face looked the same, familiar lines, the same gentle gravity in his eyes, but the manner in which he occupied the space had shifted. It was as if he stood in perfect agreement with the floor beneath him. He turned toward them. Gallo's heart lurched when he saw that Leo's gaze didn't scan the faces the way it used to. It held them, each person, as if he could feel the exact place their feet touched stone. "Your Holiness," a Monsignor began, voice tight with tremor, "we have been." Leo lifted a hand, not to silence him, but to slow him. "You've been frightened," Leo said. The words came twice again, and the older voice made the simple sentence sound like something carved rather than spoken. "And you've tried to protect what you cannot explain by sealing it away." No one answered. Because it was true, and because admitting it out loud felt like stepping onto thin ice. Gallo found his voice. "Where did you go?" Leo's eyes rested on him with quiet recognition, as if Gallo had been chosen not by rank but by proximity to the first threshold. "Not somewhere," Leo said. "Not a room. Not a passage." He paused, searching for language that could survive being heard. "The gate is not a door," Leo continued. "It is a convergence." Gallo's brow furrowed. "A convergence." "The place where what began touches what ends," Leo said. "Where the Church meets its own foundation and discovers it is not made only of doctrine and stone. It is made of memory." The word memory landed differently in the basilica. It seemed to press into the marble columns, the bronze, the air itself. The hum beneath the floor deepened a fraction, soft as distant thunder. A priest whispered, "Peter." Leo nodded once. "He never left," Leo said. "Not in the way you've been taught to imagine. He did not vanish into history. He waited." The older voice beneath his own made the word "waited" feel like a span of centuries. Gallo felt cold gather at the base of his spine. "Waited for what?" Leo's gaze drifted upward, toward the dome, toward painted saints frozen in eternal victory. "For a moment when faith would be guarded like a weapon," he said. "For a time when silence would be used as a tool." His eyes returned to them. "For a shepherd chosen by fear." A murmur rippled through the group, small, involuntary. A few of the older clergy exchanged glances that carried the weight of private conversations and unsent letters. "What happened to Cardinal Severi?" someone asked, too quickly, before caution could stop him. For the first time, a shadow passed over Leo's expression, not grief exactly, but something like consequence acknowledged. He stepped forward as a man trying to seal a wound, Leo said. But it was not a wound. It was an opening. The answer did not name death. It did not offer comfort. It left Severi suspended in a place where language could not follow. A senior official, one of Severi's allies, drawn by alarm and anger, pushed forward, his face set with the rigid fury of someone whose world depended on systems remaining obedient. "This is impossible," he said. "Whatever you experienced, whatever you believe occurred, we must contain it. We must restore order." Leo regarded him without hostility. "Order," he repeated, and the words sounded different when spoken by two voices at once. Yes. That is what you worship when you cannot bear mystery. The official's jaw tightened. You speak as if you are not subject to governance. I am subject to truth, Leo said quietly. And truth is older than governance. The man took a step closer, his hands clenched. Your Holiness, you must understand, if word spreads, if anyone learns what happened beneath the Vatican, it will fracture the Church. It will cause panic. It already has, Leo replied. The official's gaze flashed. Then we should silence it. Seal it. Remove the archivist. Remove anyone who knows. We can? The hum under the basilica rose. Not loud. Not dramatic. But unmistakable. Everyone felt it, a subtle vibration traveling up through the floor, into legs, into ribs, into teeth. A living resonance that made the air feel tuned to a single note. The official froze mid-sentence. Leo's eyes remained calm. Faith cannot be locked, he said. Not by decrees. Not by fear. Not by walls painted to look holy. A guard shifted uncomfortably. Somewhere in the basilica, a thin crack sounded, a small, sharp pop like ice giving way. Heads turned. But nothing had fallen. No stone had broken. Still, everyone understood the message. The building had heard him. The official's voice dropped, urgency sharpening it. Then what are you saying? That you intend to expose the vault? To invite chaos? Leo's expression softened. Not into kindness, but into something like pity for a man drowning in the only methods he knew. I am saying, Leo replied, that suppression will not prevent what is coming. It will hasten it. The gate will not remain dormant because you prefer it. Gallo felt his stomach twist. Your Holiness, what is coming? Leo looked at him, and for an instant Gallo had the sensation of being seen from a depth that had nothing to do with eyes. A reckoning, Leo said simply. Not of punishment. Of remembrance. The group stood suspended between two instincts, the ancient reflex to control and the unbearable pull to understand. In that space, Leo seemed less like a ruler and more like a bridge, something laid across a gap no one wanted to admit existed. He turned his head slightly, as if listening. Gallo followed his gaze and realized Leo wasn't looking at the people at all. He was listening to the stone beneath them. The hum became steadier, like a heartbeat settling into a rhythm. Leo inhaled. Then he made a decision so quietly that it took a moment for its weight to register. We will go, he said. The official stiffened. Go where? Leo's eyes lifted. To the gate, he said. And this time, not in secret. A hush fell, thicker than prayer. You cannot, the official whispered, panic spilling through authority. Not publicly. Not with witnesses. It will. It will reveal what was never meant to stay hidden, Leo said, and the older voice beneath his own turned the sentence into something inevitable. Yes. Gallo stepped forward despite himself. Your Holiness, if you go back, will you return? Leo held his gaze. In that look was something almost tender, almost human. "That depends," Leo said, "on whether the Church chooses to wake up or to keep dreaming with its eyes open." He turned toward the basilica doors. The guards, uncertain, fell into formation out of habit. Clergy gathered like a tide pulled by fear and fascination. The official who had argued for containment hesitated, then followed, because to remain behind felt like being left outside history. As Leo began to walk, the vibration beneath the basilica did not fade. It followed. Softly. Steadily. As if the foundations themselves recognized the direction he'd chosen. They moved through the Vatican not as a procession planned weeks in advance, but as a rupture in routine. Corridors that usually swallowed footsteps in quiet reverence now held the sound of many bodies trying to walk softly while failing. Doors opened. Faces appeared, priests, aides, guards, drawn by the strange, unspoken knowledge that something had shifted at the center. No one announced where they were going. No one needed to. Pope Leo XIV walked with the calm of a man following a path already written into stone. His hands were folded behind his back. His pace was unhurried. And the two voices, when he spoke quietly to those nearest, made even mundane phrases feel like they carried centuries in their syllables. Gallo stayed close enough to hear, close enough to see the small signs that would prove later this had been real, the way Leo's shadow seemed too steady under shifting light, the way guards unconsciously stepped aside before being told, the way the air itself felt tuned. They reached the apostolic library. Dust still hung in morning shafts, but the room felt altered, like a sanctuary after an uninvited presence has prayed there. The fresco of St. Peter receiving the key stood as it always had, yet the panel's edge was slightly disturbed, an imperfection that now looked like a confession. The official who had demanded containment spoke again, voice strained. "Holy Father, this is madness." Leo placed his hand on the fresco's edge, and the panel shifted without resistance, sliding aside as if the wall had grown tired of pretending. The iron door waited behind it. The Latin inscription above the keyhole seemed darker now, as if the words had absorbed the fear of those who had read them. "Not all keys are given to all men." Leo did not reach for a key. He simply touched the lock. It opened. A sound moved through the crowd behind him, sharp inhalations, the small involuntary noises people make when reality refuses to behave. The guards tightened formation, but their posture was no longer purely protective. It was reverent, the stance of men standing before something they could not fight. Leo stepped onto the first stair. He looked back once, not at the officials, not at the guards, but at Gallo. "You will remember," Leo said. Gallo's throat tightened. "Yes, Your Holiness." "And you will not allow fear to rename silence as peace," Leo added. The older voice under his own made the line feel less like instruction and more like a vow. Then he descended. The crowd followed only as far as the staircase allowed. The spiral narrowed quickly. The air grew colder with each turn. The hum, once subtle, was stronger here, a vibration that felt like the Vatican had a second heartbeat beneath its marble one. At the bottom, the chamber with the black vault waited in darkness and half-light, lit now by emergency lamps someone had hastily restored. The 7 symbols on the vault door seemed sharper, clearer, as if they'd been polished by attention. Leo approached. The vault opened with a slow exhale, releasing the metallic breath of a century. And beyond it, the hidden corridor waited. The official stepped forward as if to block him. "Holy Father." Leo met his eyes with a calm that did not yield. "Authority does not own truth," he said. "It only borrows it. And it has borrowed long enough." The official faltered. His courage was made of structures. Here, structures were soft. Leo turned and entered the corridor. This time, no one tried to follow. The narrow passage, the pressed silence, the memory of Severi's disappearance, those were sufficient warnings. Gallo stood at the threshold with the guards, watching Leo's back diminish into the darkness until he was only a pale shape moving toward the smooth stone door. The door was closed when he arrived. The scene was invisible. The surface was perfectly still. Leo lifted his hand, and for a moment it looked like he might knock, like any man asking permission to enter a room. Instead, he placed his palm on the stone and breathed out. The seam appeared. A line of light, pale and patient, opening the way. The corridor's silence thickened. Gallo felt it from where he stood, as if the air itself were being pulled inward. Leo turned his head slightly, as though listening to something beyond hearing. Then he stepped forward. No force. No panic. Only recognition. The door parted. Light filled the corridor, not blinding, not violent, but absolute. The kind of light that makes shadows irrelevant. Leo stepped through. And the stone door closed behind him with the quiet finality of a lid settling on a reliquary. For several seconds, no one moved. Then the hum underfoot deepened, steady, deliberate. Not a warning. A pulse. Gallo felt the floor vibrate through his shoes, through bone, through breath. It was as if the Vatican itself had become an instrument struck once and held in resonance. He realized, with sudden clarity, that the Church had spent centuries treating its foundations as inert. They were not. The statement the Vatican issued later that day was unlike any in living memory. It did not deny what had happened. Denial would have required certainty. It did not explain. Explanation would have required control. It was only a single sentence, released in the careful language of institutions forced to admit they were no longer the only authors of reality. The chair of Peter remains empty until he returns. No mention of vaults. No mention of the gate. No mention of vanished cardinals or humming stone. Just an absence turned into policy. And the world, receiving that sentence, reacted as the world always does when it senses a fissure in something it assumed was immovable. News outlets speculated. Governments requested clarification. Faithful crowds gathered in St. Peter's Square in numbers that looked like devotion and felt like waiting. Theories multiplied like shadows at dusk. But beneath the noise, a quieter truth settled. Something had happened that could not be folded back into routine. Gallo stood that evening in a side corridor of the Apostolic Library, staring at the fresco panel that now seemed less like art and more like a mask. Around him, guards maintained their posts. Officials held hushed meetings that circled the same void. He could still feel it. The pulse. Slowly. Steadily. Not in the air, beneath it. In the architecture. In the ground. As if the foundations themselves were awake. Gallo thought of the kneeling imprint in stone, the way the earth had remembered prayer, as though prayer were a force strong enough to shape matter. He thought of Leo's two voices, perfectly aligned, as if a single sentence could be spoken by both man and memory. And he understood something that made his hands go cold. Faith was no longer symbolic. Silence was no longer empty. Down beneath the Vatican, behind walls no map admitted existed, something continued to beat, soft and persistent, like a heart that had waited a long time to be heard. And what the Church had called hidden had only been waiting to be revealed. Not an ending. An activation. Before you go, subscribe, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and share your thoughts.